Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attendance and welcome back to day 2 of the Warriors Corner. At this time, I would like to welcome Major General John Morrison and Major General James Mingus.
Hey, are we mic'd up? Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? How's everybody doing? Did you guys just sit through the Chiefs luncheon? You ready to kind of go through a wall? Fired up? I know I'm fired up. But the timing of that could not have been better in terms of what John and I are going to talk about today. And as was introduced, I've been in the position about a year now. I'm the director of the Mission Command Center of Excellence. And John, go ahead.
I'm the, sorry about that. I'm the commander of the Cyber Center of Excellence in Fort Gordon. And we're not going to stand too close to each other because we don't want to blind you with our two foreheads.
John does shave every day. I only shave every 3 days. So that's the one discerning factor. But there's several people that are here as part of this that have been part of what we're going to talk about for the past 7-8 months now. And so this is truly what we're going to talk about with you today. Has been a team effort. And there's been a lot of folks behind what have made today possible. We'd like to spend about 20, 30 minutes talking to you about where we think we're going with the network, where we think we're going with some of the cyber elements, and then we would like to actually start up a dialogue and have a conversation. Is that a little better? Okay, so if we could bring up the first chart. You heard the Chief just talk about the 6 modernization priorities. The network is one of those 6 modernization priorities. This journey began several years ago, but we were moving at a pace that was never going to get us to where we wanted to be in a time that we thought was necessary given the threats that you just heard at the Eisenhower lunch. So the Chief personally took this on starting back in March. And we all thought that it might last a month or two, but he has personally gone through every single system, every program, every component of the network that exists for the Army today to make sure that he fully understood what was good, what was bad, what we needed to do differently, and how we were going to change some things.
Jim, if I may. And what was different about this was, as we went through the systems, it wasn't about the operational capability only that the individual systems that were coming. It was aligned against a near-peer threat. And what has changed since we wrote requirements, in some cases over a decade ago.
And with that threat, and what we're going to kind of show you is that if you think about how the enemy has developed his architecture on the other end, he talked about the need for the long-range fires, future vertical lift, future combat systems, the network, soldier enhancement. The network component of that, when you look at how the enemy has built his fires apparatus to both blind and create these extensive standoffs, unless we do some things to our network, unless we do some things to our command and control systems, our mission command systems, unless we do something to our command post infrastructure, it is our belief that our command posts, and i.e. the network, will not survive against a near-peer or a peer competitor.
Yeah, you know, think about it. An environment where you have to move your command post every 30 to 60 minutes. We've already seen what's happened over in Europe. And those command posts that did not move rapidly were targeted through non-kinetic, and then eventually very, very kinetic long-range precision fires, and the casualties were catastrophic.
So if you think about command posts, you think about the network, system of systems, treat it like a weapon. And as John just talked about, just like an artillery system, if it hadn't shot in about 3 hours, it's probably going to move. If it has shot, it is going to move, no matter what. And we need to kind of think about our command posts. We need to think about our network in a very, very similar vein. So as we started this journey, we sat down with the Chief and we started thinking through because nobody had done a comprehensive from first principles of the Army all the way to the characteristics and requirements of the network. Nobody had done that crosswalk in quite some time. And so that was one of the first things that we started with. And he alluded to some of this during his talk today in terms of the left. What does the Army exist to do? It exists to prepare for war, and it exists to execute war. Subset to that, in terms of the warfighter requirements, he laid those out. Fight, shoot, move, communicate, protect, and sustain. Those are the words that he used. Now, how does that translate then to command posts? How does that translate to our network? So then we came up with the characteristics, which you should see there, simple and intuitive, available, reliable, expeditionary and mobile, standards-based. And John and I are going to talk a lot about standards-based and why that's so important. And that's from the enterprise level all the way to the tactical edge. Then it moved over to technical requirements. What are we going to pass off to industry? What are we going to pass off from a technical requirements perspective without, like we've done in the past, been very, very narrow in how we describe those things to allow for innovation, to allow for other types of things and thinking through on what we want this network to look like. And that's how we came up with the technical requirements for the network. Secure voice, data, video, anywhere, anytime, standardized, again, and I'll talk about COE here in a little bit. Upgradable, enables rapid task organization, which gets back to the flexibility and the dynamic nature of what we need things, and finally, accessible to partners and allies that are out there.
And when you take a look at it, you are seeing words like survivable, resilient, things that, quite frankly, we were not capturing as we built this network. Now, nobody was evil. We built this to fight in a counterinsurgency environment. But over the last 15, 16 years, we've got some potential adversaries that have gone to school on how we do business. And quite frankly, we've let some of our capabilities degrade. And now we've got to build that resiliency inherently into the network so it is adaptive and flexible and supports our mission command.
So before I go to the next chart, which is going to talk, don't go there yet. Before I go to the next chart, we spent a lot of time after this just studying the broad problem from top to bottom. And I'm not going to bring the chart up that talks about all the different things that are a part of it, because I mean, we literally spent at least 45 to 60 days just doing nothing but studying the problem. But suffice it to say, if you start at the Joint Staff and OSD level, there's over 1,000 disparate networks and databases that exist. As you come down inside the Army, there's 15 functional and 15 organizational and 5 functional networks that exist with just in the Army. And again, hundreds of databases associated with that. You come down to the tactical level, and our radios, our transport mechanisms, and our ABCS systems, or our mission command systems, there are 17 of those that were designed never to talk to each other in a seamless way. We came up with patches. We came up with ways to make that all work because we were in a static environment in Afghanistan and Iraq. We were able to kind of make that work, but none of it was designed. As we go to the future, as we converge our networks, as we converge our data centers, as we go to identity management, as we go to a true unified transport layer, and we go to a true unified common operating environment, it's going to bring about the vision that you see kind of on this chart.
Yeah, and so what does converged really mean? It means getting onto a common network infrastructure so that it is not stovepiped and it's defensible. Quite frankly, when you operate with that many disparate networks, it creates gaps and seams. It allows the enemy to have an avenue of attack into our network. We've got to bring it onto a common infrastructure, make it standards-based, so that as we introduce new capabilities, it is much more seamless by using a unified transport layer that really is IP-based.
Okay, now go ahead and bring up the next chart. Where are we headed? We looked at 4 big, broad strategic options associated with how do we fix this. One was status quo. We had a modernization path. We had a modernization strategy. It wasn't bad, but it took us till 2032 to get there, and it cost way too much money. The second one was, okay, let's try and expedite some things. But it did not account for the necessity to look at the entire network. And the last one, other than this, which was, let's just start over. Well, that became kind of infeasible too, because the thing that we kept coming back to over and over again is what you kind of heard the chief just talk about, is there is still a necessity to be able to fight tonight if that call comes. So how do you fix yourself now while you modernize for the future? And so that's the premise and the kind of the cornerstone behind our program, which is we're going to halt programs that do not sufficiently or cannot be sufficiently remedied. We're going to fix those programs that we need to be able to fight tonight, and then we're going to pivot to an adapt and buy approach. And we're going to talk more about what adapt and buy means, but here's kind of the 30-second or less. As we worked with our industry partners and all the experts that are out there, and you look at what we are doing from an S&T and an R&D perspective when it comes to information technology, the commercial sector surpassed us a long time ago. We will never keep up. So there's either joint, soft, or commercial solutions that probably meet the majority of our needs that are out there. So let's go, after you've identified a gap, Let's go find it. Let's try it. Let's adapt it, and let's buy it. Instead of us going through these long developmental kind of linear programs that the chief talked about here over the lunchtime. I'm going to go back up to the fixed part and tell you a little bit what we're doing against those 4 lines of effort. I'm going to talk about 2 of them, and John's going to talk about 2 of them as well. I'm going to talk command post and the common operating environment. Our command post right now, if I put a picture up here of what a common brigade combat team looks like at one of the either at the National Training Center or the Joint Readiness Training Center or our training center over in Europe, we would all be kind of appalled when we think about that in the context of a near peer or peer competitor. The physical infrastructure of our command posts that are out there will not survive. It takes days to put them up, it takes days to take them down. You add that to the complexity of the network itself, and it almost becomes an untenable kind of situation for our commanders in the field. So we've got to get after the physical infrastructure of the command post, which is tied to and integrated as part of a system of systems. We're going to take a kind of a 3-phased approach to getting after command posts. The first is we're going to very rapidly bring some ISO containers and some expando vans and shelters, wireless, and smart power to several echelons throughout the Army. And we're going to experiment with that to make sure that we've got the right combination of ISOs versus expando vans versus this versus that to get back that mobility, agility, and survivability of the command posts that we need. The second is we're going to take several brigade combat teams and not just give them the physical but start to begin the integration and the adjustments on the inside so they're form fit, so as we bring on our future command and control systems that are out there, they work seamlessly together. And then the third phase is after we've looked at and been informed by those prototyping efforts in the first 2, this will move to a program for the long term for the Army. The second one I'm going to talk about is common operating environment, and I alluded to it earlier, our 17 ABCS, disparate ABCS systems that we have right now. That's CPOF, that's 8 FATADs, that's TAEUS, that's AMDUs, that's GEEKs, on and on and on. All of which were built kind of on their own. And many of them have their own complete infrastructure, from data layer all the way up. And they were not built to work together. So what we were going to is a program called the Common Operating Environment. And simply speaking, what is that? That is a unified data layer at the bottom with a common architecture on top of that in 6 computing environments. So if you think phone, tablet, PC, all from the same element, that's kind of what we're trying to develop here. And then you have unique applications, warfighting applications, that then ride on top of that common architecture. So movement and maneuver will still have their own app. Fires will still have their own app. Intel will still have their own app. But it won't be its own complete, separate, standalone infrastructure that goes with that. It's all an integrated approach, which then ties nicely into the unified transport layer that John will talk about.
So you're going to hear a lot about, before I taught these 2, about experimentation. And that experimentation is to do 2 things. One is we don't need to try and hit a home run every single time. What we want to do is, through experimentation, develop our requirements, make sure we understand what it is we want to do moving forward, and then in 3 to 5 year sprints, procure what we need to, so we can iteratively improve ourselves as we move through the course of time. That ties back into the transport layer. How long does it take generally to put a network up in the field from your experience at NIE? A couple days? On average, 45 to 50 hours to bring the network up. And it's because we don't have a unified transport layer. So under transport, what we're going to do is integrate the upper and lower TIs. And we're going to change our business model of which we are approaching tactical radios. Gone are the days where we're going to specify a technical waveform saying that's exactly what we want and only what we want. What we ended up finding was we were self-limiting ourselves. So now we're going to go out and do a best value approach where we're going to ask industry partners to bring in those waveforms that they've got on a given box, and then we'll make a judgment where the best value from an operational perspective is that gives us multi-band, multi-mode capabilities, but more importantly, gives the commander choice. The second part of that we're going to do is move towards interoperability. And this is going to be done not only from a joint and a coalition perspective, but quite frankly, it's going to help us establish that unified transport layer, where we'll leverage gateways to start flattening that lower topology and get everybody into an IP layer quicker, that'll do a couple different things. It'll help us stand up the network far faster than we have in the past. But most importantly, 2 points. It'll allow us to allow folks that are on different types of nets to communicate very, very quickly. And then third, it will allow us to have joint interoperability like we haven't had before. We're also taking a very hard look at bringing Link 16 into the architecture and see where that fits. Again, we will experiment with that, figure out what the right architecture really should be, and then we will move forward with it. But we want to leverage other people's investments. And in the Link 16 environment, the joint community has got $1 billion ecosystem that's sitting out there. And quite frankly, some of the results we've seen with early experimentation inside the 82nd are extremely promising. Quotes coming out of the most recent 82nd Warfighter, the best situational awareness they have seen across the board, simply by using other people's investments and these gateways.
Okay, last couple of points on this, because what does this look like over time? It's easy, there's a lot of bumper stickers up here, but how does this unfold over time? And then I'll talk to you the environments in which this is going to operate in. 18 is really about going out and finding those things that are available today, either in the commercial industry that's out there, or joint or soft solutions that we can apply now, that we can apply literally right now to the force to buy down operational risks in the event that we do have to fight tonight. Because we have so many of these elements that are out there as part of the network, and to include the physical infrastructure that puts our command posts out there at very, very high risk. So how do we do as much as we can in 18 to begin to buy that down immediately? We're also going to begin to set the conditions for this pivot to adapt and buy. So from 19 and beyond, now we're going to be back out. Who's going to develop the best next mobile satellite dish? Who's going to develop the next best router and switch? Who's going to develop the next best server stack that's out there? Who's going to develop the next best multi-mode, multifunctional radio that ties in that lower and that upper TI so we have this unified transport layer? And we're going to begin that market research. We're going to be able to experiment. We're going to be able to start prototyping those efforts. Like I said, setting those conditions in 18 so we can begin that pivot in 19 and beyond. The other thing that's going to be different about this in the future is we're going to buy less of it more often. In other words, when this after the fix, we're going to have a future state 1. Still a little bit, we can visualize what that future state 1 looks like, but there's some things that we still need to define as part of that. But it's coming together very close, and that'll be the first one that goes out there, and maybe it's 25, maybe it's 30% of the Army. And you field that as rapidly as you can. Then when the next future state comes out, you cascade either back to that same unit, if it's a priority issue, or it's some other method in which we cascade the initial future state until you keep going over in what we're calling 3 to 5 year sprints. But what we can't do is continue to buy and acquire things today that actually don't come to the force for 8 years from now, and you keep it for 20 years, and it's outdated before you ever get it out there. It's just rapid turn on technology to keep pace with it as best we can. So that's kind of how this looks like over time if you were to visualize how that looks like.
It really is leveraging the power of a software-defined environment so that we can iteratively spin in new capabilities and then, just as importantly, spin them out. And the other thing that I would tell you is that we've got to bake in electronic warfare resiliency into everything that we do, and cyber resiliency into everything that we do.
Okay, next chart, please. Now, what are the environments we have to operate in? In the past, if a unit got alerted for some type of operation, live or training, they might plan for it, they might exercise it, and they wanted to go over to their sim center and then train it again. Because we had disparate and closed networks, there was a complete rebuild of that process. When a unit would go from home station to the far end, that data may or may not necessarily go with them. They may have to start over again, and they may not be able to connect seamlessly all the way back. So as we look to the future, going back to the standards-based architecture, the converged networks, and all the things we've talked about thus far, from the training environment the chief was talking about over lunch, home station, en route, upon arrival, at the tactical edge, that end-user device connecting to that network anywhere, anytime, any place in the world has to be there. And it will be based on these conditions that we're going to set. The last is, as you are in that environment, have to keep in mind that there is a There's a dismounted component to this. There's a mounted component to this. There's a command post component to this. Inside of our doctrine, we talk about, we have mobile command groups. We have TACs. We have mains. We have support area command posts. So you have all those that have to apply to all of this so that, again, that end user device is connected to that network. So whether he's on a tablet or a handheld device or on a PC, what he's looking at, the data and how he looks at it is the same. And the infrastructure behind it is in such a way that it doesn't take days to set up and establish. I don't know if you
Yeah, so while this looks like a cartoon, I will tell you in my last job, they supported 9 different named operations, and there was not one time where there was not distributed mission command in action. Our challenge was we were just cobbling it together, and we couldn't do the vision that Jim just laid out. Picture this. I need to deploy to Southwest Asia, but I'm able to pre-configure before I even leave home so that when I land in Southwest Asia, I'm able to begin operations almost immediately. That's what we're talking about when we say a standards-based architecture. Able to deploy anywhere, anytime, under any environment, and immediately get on that and start conducting operations.
Okay, last thing on network stuff, and then we'll transition to some cyber conversation. General Milley mentioned this, which is also a huge part, not really reflected, because it's still kind of, we're trying to figure out how we incorporate this. And that's artificial intelligence, that's machine learning, that's big data. If you think about the cognitive hierarchy from data to information to knowledge to understanding to then be able to visualize, describe, direct, lead, assess, and that do loop that goes all the way around. Most of the things that happen moving from data to information to knowledge, it's a huge human endeavor because we don't have anything that helps us sift through all the data that is out there. Since 1969, we've been on an exponential curve of amount of information and data available to anyone in the world at any time, just based on their access to the network. And that's not going to change. With AI and machine learning and big data and all the things that are coming online, there's some that believe that it's going to go viral. So we have to, as a military, as an army, have to figure out how do we harness that to ultimately, and you saw the OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act faster than the enemy. It is our belief that as we build these suite of applications that ride on top of that common operating environment, applying artificial intelligence and machine learning to at least help elevate initially from data up through knowledge at a very rapid rate. The other thing that we struggle with in any of the environments that we operate in is when there's a change in mission, when there's a change in the operating environment, when there's a change in whatever you may be doing, there's an immediate huge degradation because we have to almost, not always, but there's many times where you're almost starting all over again to get yourself back up to that understanding and or knowledge and understanding. Artificial intelligence and machine learning could help reduce those curves. And eventually, when it's fully realized, it's involved in an entire decision loop without taking the human out of the loop, but it is helping you because it's pulling that sensor data, it's pulling that intel feed, it's pulling all those things that are out there, and it's synthesizing in a much more rapid rate than we can do it as humans that helps commanders and staff make decisions much more rapidly. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, John.
Nope. Then I think you hit it perfect. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk very, very briefly about FM 3-12, which is the Army's first cyberspace and electronic warfare doctrine. It was published last April. So last October when people would ask me, tell me how we're going to fight in cyberspace, we had no doctrinal underpinnings to get after it. Now we do. It's nested very closely under JP 312, which is the joint doctrine. I'm going to bring up a couple points. First off, it establishes DONOPS, read the network, as the foundation for cyberspace. I will tell you, if you were talking to General Nakasone, he would tell you about 80% of his business is actually operating, maintaining, and defending the network. This is where the signal regiment lives. And you'll notice that it's threat focus or network focused, threat agnostic. So read it almost like they're the BCT terrain owner. They're defending against a broad myriad of threats, but they're really focused on just that operation maintenance and that broader security. Over here on the left, we busted down not only DONOPS, but also defensive cyber operations. Defensive cyber operations, internal defensive measures, those things where you're going against a specific threat on your friendly network. So think of them as, that's our 17 series, that's our cyber core. Soft forces that come in, help the terrain owner against a specific threat. Defensive cyber response actions, that's where you're going into gray space and you're defending a threat before it actually hits your network. And then obviously we have our cyber mission teams doing offensive cyber that are going against threats on their networks. None of this is capable without happening with the electromagnetic spectrum in all three disciplines: electronic protect, electronic survivability, and then obviously electronic attack. But this is the framework in which we must operate, and the network is the one that buttresses it all and brings it all together. I know that sounds almost intuitive, but there is no defensive cyber operations without the network. There is no offensive cyber operations without the network. And the EMS is extrinsically linked to everything that we're doing from a cyberspace operations.
Okay, I think that concludes the formal portion of what we had. And so what we would like to do is open it up for questions or dialogue or any comments that you may have on what General Morrison and I or either one had to say today.
You got to help us out, because if you guys don't ask us questions, we'll start asking you questions.
Sir, General Wallace.
Your opinion, can you meet the characteristics and requirements you just showed and gain the flexibility that we need in our networks absent an aerial layer or an aerial tier?
Sir, great question. In fact, it's a lick on us for not talking about that. And if you go back one slide, kind of built into the network augmentation and extension that you see there from a requirements perspective. What we mean by that is that we really don't have a great capability beyond line of sight short of satellite. So, and even before we're contested and congested, there's still a lack of satellite capability to do all the things in a large-scale combat operation environment against a peer competitor. We know that we're challenged there. And so it is our belief that this is absolutely an operational requirement that we are working to codify and bring forward to work. And I'm personal opinion, reluctant to say it's just an aerial tier, because aerial tier may or may not be all weather. That's a part of it, but there may also be a terrestrial component. There may be a subspace component to it. I think it's a combination of multiple things that guarantee the network if you lose it in other places, so that you have that beyond line of sight, short of satellite kind of capability.
Yes, sir, you bring up a great point, and we probably should have hit it a little bit harder. But it's all about resiliency. But to Jim's point, a lot of it's going to be based off of the operational conditions we have at the time. And so it's going to be, when do we actually put it in there in a METTC almost kind of environment? What I will tell you we need to do is take a step back from the traditional way we looked at the aerial tier. Traditionally it's let's put it up on a UAS, let's put it up on an airplane, let's put it up on a helicopter, and that's now your aerial tier. When you take a look at the new technologies that are actually coming on board, it may be on a balloon. It may be on, you pick it. It may be a extremely low Earth orbiting satellite that's up there for a point in time and then comes down. And so we got to broaden our aperture of what it means when we say aerial tier.
Yeah, as you're probably aware, sir, there's companies out there that are experimenting with these high-altitude, geostationary, solar-powered balloons that you can strap. The vision of that is eventually it replaces our cellular infrastructure on the ground, that it gives that global. So there's clearly a military application to that, because that's something you could potentially take with you instantaneously, anytime, anywhere. I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions?
Got a question over here. Bob Skurlock. Can you talk about how well this concept integrates in the joint and multinational community?
John could talk to the technical stuff way more than I, but going back to this converged network, cloud-based computing environment, kind of those that understand how that all is going to transpire, and it's going to have the commercial-based standards that are associated with that. What we have done in the past is we have typically built incompatible boxes. Our CPOF, our command post of the future, is a secret no-form box. well, it's naturally not going to be interoperable with any coalition partner that's out there. So it is our belief in the future that it's no longer about building incompatible boxes, but it is access to the data and how it's partitioned and who has the right credentials. You have the right identity. So if you are a bona fide person, a part of this coalition or in a joint environment, it naturally lends itself to a much more coalition-friendly environment. And it also starts with discussions we're having on secret releasable as the baseline for the network architecture instead of secret no-form. I mean, our default is secret no-form. We heard the chief today, we're not going to fight alone ever again. So if you start with a network that is secret releasable to begin with, the FDO procedures are much easier to handle on the back end. So
I'm going to bust it into two pieces. I'm going to take the coalition portion of it first. So the unified transport layer really is just getting to IP, where you have much greater control to actually manage, rapidly reconfigure a network, and you can bring complexity up into the right echelons, as opposed to where we're at right now. It's already out at the edge. That's one piece of it. The second portion of it is we're having a lot of discussions, and we're going to validate with some of this FFAB, Security Force Assistance Brigade architecture, about secure but unclassified, vice secret, down at the tactical edge. Our belief is, with perishable tactical information, by the time somebody was actually crack a level of encryption, you're probably already on to the next target. Think about what that does for our coalition partners now. Now you can give them the same radio, and you're able to interoperate down at the lowest level possible, versus having to come up all the way through some gateway and then back down where you may or may not have that connectivity. It is potentially a game changer. We're going to experiment with that over the course of the next year. Our guts say that's the right way to go. On the joint side, I go back to really the premise of adapt and buy is look what's already out there inside the joint force and with our soft partners. And if it's something that we can use, Link 16, a huge ecosystem, then we bring that in. Right off the bat, that's going to increase joint interoperability on the front end. Sir.
Generals, Richard Spencer from the British Army. What can we do to support this initiative to ensure that we get that coalition interoperability that you've just talked about, to ensure that when we go on day one of the next mission, we've got that interoperability at the first place?
I guess we shouldn't ask for money.
Well, if you're heading in the same direction from a network architecture perspective that we are, going back to what General Morrison's saying, is that if it is true standards-based IP, it's going to be this plug and play. And so it becomes no longer incompatible. It's not an incompatible network. It's just access to the data. And so it will have that natural inherent. But if you do what we've done for the last 15 years, and that's build secret no-form boxes, then we're going to have issues. And you partition that data so that you, without having a box that is compatible with yours or a gateway solution or a DDS-like solution that links us, then we have the same problem we have now.
Yeah, and I know we're doing a lot of work with your government already. I would offer two things. One is when we have coalition exercises, whether they're over in Europe, out in the Pacific, or here in the United States, or inside your country, we need to force that to continue to happen. And then not just let the lessons learned stay on the table. We've got to rise them up to a level where, quite frankly, at the senior leader level, we're addressing those concerns and keeping that visibility on it. We're all guilty of, we go out, we do an exercise, we conduct an AAR, and it stays an AAR. What we need to do is turn it into something that we're actually correcting.
Yeah. And frankly, too, we in the course of the next couple months, we've paid a lot, as you know, working with you and some of your other close ally partners that we work with all the time together. We've been working this for a while, but it's not had the energy probably it could have, because we wanted to make our priorities were threefold. First, we got to be able to interoperable within our own Army, which we weren't. Next, we got to be interoperable with our own joint force, which we weren't. Now we can begin to shift to truly put the fixes in place to ensure that our coalition interoperability is there too.
Yeah, I just want to pull the string on what Jim just sat there and said. We literally, inside our own Army, weren't near as interoperable as we needed to be. And we also did not take a second look or even a third look at some of our existing requirements. So as a part of this initiative, a couple different things have happened. We've got some really good capabilities that are coming on from enhanced line of sight that will allow us to use a lot more varied parts of the spectrum, which will help us make a much more survivable network, and quite frankly, a much more capable network. But we had it going to the wrong spots. It was going to the expeditionary signal battalions by putting them into our maneuver formations where it was going to make the biggest difference. So we've gone back in and we've relooked all those requirements so that we can get after the fight tonight shortfalls that General Mingus mentioned. We also have six to seven software baselines that are across our Army on our mission command systems. In some cases, it goes even deeper than that. So U.S. Army units are on different baselines and could not be interoperable. By the time we get to 19, we'll be down to 2, and everybody will be able to communicate on their mission command systems, no matter which of the 2 variants that they're on.
Sir, you can borrow mine.
So my question, I have to ask a question. My question relates to not necessarily the technology, which I think you guys are addressing in a big way. My question is about the seams between the brigade, the division, the corps, and now the theater, who really own these gateways, or the strategic guys, DISA, Army, NETCOM. What is the new relationship between them on a daily basis as opposed to an exercise-only basis? I mean, aren't they engaged at the theater level all the time, not just some of the time?
Yeah, so you want me to take
Go ahead.
that? Yeah, so that is a great question. So 2 parts to that. One is we are doing a tactical signal pilot that's assessing that force structure and the relationship on echelon at the division level and below, but also how it ties back into the echelon. So not one CTC rotation now that unit goes into the box where they are not linked from their net ops all the way back to a regional cyber center. So you get that overwatch while that's happening. In garrison, when mission command systems are on the network, that same relationship is existing. Now, are we where we need to be? No, not yet. As we do our end-to-end analysis of what that force structure needs to look like, and we echelon it the right way, because we want to get complexity at the right echelons, and we certainly don't want it down here at the edge. That the folks up here at the enterprise level can handle a lot more as long as they're focused down at the tactical edge. That's a culture change, what I just sat there and said. But that linkage is happening during every one of our CTC rotations, and when we put things on the network in garrison, it's happening again. So it's maturing, and it's getting much, much better. We are working our final doctrine that's going to really bring this end-to-end network together, specifically from a net ops and defense perspective.
And then there's the technical component of it. General Gallagher is sitting over here on the left. Pete, raise your hand, please. CIO G6, he's been one of our battle buddies in this journey, but he's been working the technical component of this, how to bring not just the organizational, but the standards associated from enterprise all the way to the tactical, so there is no gap in between. And he's been leading that working group now for several weeks.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, as a technical guy, I'm not going to ask a technical question. But intuitively, you think about all these, the network convergence and all these technologies to make things easier, better, faster, greater. You think it would be simpler for the operator. From a training perspective, big wave top, what are we doing to get after the training aspect of getting to these new technologies and improving our network?
I'll offer a couple of thoughts, and I'm sure, General, because we both have initiatives there. COE that I mentioned several times, as we came up with the key performance parameters for what this thing was going to look like, the way we've typically built those, which then goes over to our ASALT side and acquisition side, which then ends up out with industry somewhere, and it says something to the effect of, after 40 hours of training, said soldier will retain 80% of what he was trained. We've kind of flipped that, and we've said, with no training, that soldier will be able to execute 80% of all given tasks on that particular platform, and only through some type of training will he be able to access the advanced components of whatever that system is. None of us got instructions for our phones. The technology is behind the plate, not in front of the plate. You should be able to pick up our end-user devices and our network systems that are out there and turn that thing on and be able to operate about 80% of the solution. The other reason why that has happened beyond the technical requirements on how we've written that is that we build boxes or we build applications that are completely foreign to anything else we've done in our lifetime. I mean, whether it's Windows, whether it's iOS, whether it's Droid, I mean, we've kind of all grown up, and so when the next version of something comes out, it is close enough to the old that there's not a lot of learning curve associated with that new system. So why do, when we pull applications out, do we come up with, it doesn't look like anything any of us have ever touched in our entire lifetime? We need to flip that on its end as well, and it'll get after that training component, because at the end of the day, all this stuff should enable Mission Command. It should enable our soldiers. It should not be it should not encumber by any stretch of the imagination.
I'm going to be very brief to get after that, because I think it would be good if General Mingus talked about cross-functional teams as it relates to the network here real quick. So a couple different thoughts, right? So one, we've got to fix our training, because the folks that need to handle the complexity, your signaleers, your cyber folks, your electronic warfare professionals, we're not teaching them that way right now. We're teaching them a box, and so the second, it's just like the application example you just got, the second a new box shows up, it's completely new training. So General Edmondson inside the Signal School is institutionalizing foundational training that brings every MOS, regardless of what their real specialty is, up to a certain level to operate in an IP world. And then on top of that, they'll get their MOS-specific training. And then the second piece of it is we're partnering with the Communications Electronics Command for the sustainment universities that are out in the field and now linking them back to the institution. And what that's going to do is allow us to get to a train, employ, train model so that we can continue to improve the network proficiency of our signaleers, electronic warfare officers, professionals, and cyber professionals, and bring that all together.
One of the other things, and you heard General Milley talk a little bit about this, on those 6 modernization priorities, there's going to be what we're calling cross-functional teams that are going to help bring some of those on at a much more rapid rate than what we have done in the past. And since we have a lot of our industry partners here, you guys are all very, very familiar with the DevOps concept. I would assume I see a lot of people going north-south, where we took the developmental component with the operational component, combined it underneath one hat to speed up. Think in the military terms of a JIADF, where you take intel, planners, operational arm, put them all underneath the same tent, same time zone, so that they can execute targets much faster than what you would in a normal conventional sense. We're doing the same thing with the cross-functional teams. The difference, though, because we're going to take acquisition, we're going to take requirements. Most importantly, though, the operational force, as part of that 3-legged portion of the stool, with testers and evaluators and everything else on the inside, to be able to much more rapidly prototype and experiment with what we're trying to do. Say again?
Just finish up. We're getting the hook. Just finish up.
Are we done?
Go ahead. No, finish up.
Oh.
Finish up.
One last question?
No. Okay.
All right. Well, that was really what I was going to say about CFTs, which will be part of this, and it'll also help some of that training component, because if you get that real-time user feedback as you're developing this stuff, you're going to know ahead of time whether this thing is going to encumber or actually enable Mission Command.
Yes, so I'm just going to close here real quick. There is a sense of urgency to what we're doing. And so we do have to fix ourselves to fight tonight. The threat is real. All you have to do is read the papers or go online, and you can see that the threat is real. And quite frankly, if we don't change, we are doing a disservice to our soldiers and our nation. You heard General Milley and how passionate he was. The only thing worse than not winning a war is losing one. And if we lose, your Army loses, everybody loses. Thank you very much.